Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Jinnah Institute series of discussions on important policy subjects. So one of the core asks of our time is how to program inclusion in our systems and societies. This is a question that multiple societies are dealing with, including Pakistan. And the frameworks of international bodies like the UN, etc., the SDGs are helpful. But really, eventually, it's down to how governments, how societies program values like inclusion, integration, especially for disadvantaged groups. So the PTI government came into power talking about an education apartheid. And they seem to be on the right side of this particular debate as to how a large cohort of our population is outside, the net of benefit sharing. There is too much loss shared by cohorts who are excluded by education, by age, by where they live in Pakistan, so on and so forth. And we have seen that disadvantages compound for those minorities, for those excluded groups. The PTI had it right in its manifesto when it came to power. But 2 or 3 years in now, and they rolled out a special national curriculum with that in mind, to end the single national curriculum, to end the education apartheid. They enacted a whole program, they brought on experts, etc. So we'd like to talk to Ms. Ayesha Razzaque, who has done a lot of research on this subject and who holds a PhD in this subject as well. We'd like to talk to her as to how this exercise rolled out and whether the outcome of inclusion and inclusiveness is eventually programmed as a result of this intervention. Ayesha, thank you for joining us. What do you think about inclusion and where it stands with this government and the single national curriculum? Does it make good on that promise?
Thank you very much for having me. If you allow me, I'd like to can I preface the conversation?
Absolutely.
I just want to be able to give a little bit background to the whole SNC debate and how it's played out in the past 2 years, because I think that prefacing is important for people to understand, where I am coming from and how this entire conversation about or how the SNC, the single national curriculum, came about. So basically, if you go back into the history a little bit, I mean, a lot of people think that this the whole conversation around the single national curriculum started after the PTI government came into power in 2018. So, but that is not true. If you look back at the education manifesto that the PTI came up with after their 2013, after they made government in the KP in 2013, it basically the slogan that you keep hearing about ending the education apartheid and class difference, and how children who come from certain streams of education are very different from children who come from other streams of education. So in order to mitigate those differences, even in those days in 2013, their education manifesto talked about merging the education streams, basically meaning that all children should go to similar schools, which basically means not similar schools as in, you'll have the same access to the same infrastructure or the same teachers, but the same system of schooling, ideally your public system of schooling. So basically you'll do away with your private stream and your madrasa stream, ideally, and everybody is going to come into the ambit of the public education system. You'll study the same books, you'll go through the same curriculum, you'll go through the same assessment system, and you'll ideally be instructed in the same language, which is your national language, Urdu. So this has been their political slogan for a very long time now. So when they eventually came into power in 2018, they started. So the national education policy that is something that every new government, when they come in, they do away with the old education policy. It doesn't matter how good that document is, and they try and bring in their own thing. The government hasn't been able to launch its national education policy, not as yet. They're still in the process of formulating it, but they did come up with a national education framework in 2018 after they assumed power. And if you look at it, there are 4 fundamental pillars to it. Number one being we all know there are a lot of children who are out of school. Depending on which reference you cite or look at, around 22 million children are out of school right now. So the very first, policy issue that they wanted to tackle was how to bring in these out of school children into the your education system. The second pillar that they thought is very important and is very important for governments to focus on is the quality of your education. So they wanted to fix the quality of education. There are multiple things that you can do, of course, curriculum being one of them. The third was, bringing in or fixing technical education, vocational education. And the fourth was the examination system. We have to bring in all schools. Like I said before, you'll merge all the streams. You'll have everybody sit through, go through the same education system and have the same kind of assessment at the end of the day, get the same kinds of certification. So, bridge basically the education apartheid, so to speak. Those were the four key pillars that they promised they'll work on in their tenure.
But not bad ideas, like all four of them seem to be coming from the right impulse.
And everyone has talked about them. PTI government is not the first government that has committed to these objectives. But a lot of, if you remember on their campaign trail also, and I remember in 2018, even before this, the election happened and PTI came into power, I actually, right before the election, I did an article for the TNS, for the news, the Sunday edition, and I compared the education manifestos of the three major parties, the PMN and the PPP and the PTI, and there were various aspects of it that I compared across party manifestos. And PTI, since those campaigning days, has emphasized ending the class. I mean, that was their biggest slogan, right? That we are here for the people, the downtrodden and people who have been left behind. And there's a certain elite class in this country that's basically hogging all the resources, including the education resources. We are going to end it all, and we are going to bring everybody. We are going to level the playing field for everybody, right? So I mean, that was the biggest for everybody. If you remember in those days, the youth, professionals like ourselves.
There's a huge amount of hope in the country.
Like ourselves, we thought, this guy is going to make a difference, this party is going to make a difference, let's give them a chance. They're saying all the right things, and things that we have always wanted to happen in this country. So, I mean, those were, of course, all the right slogans. The issue is that, those who are in the field of education understand that it's not as simple as that. It's not as simple as, I mean, your class divide is not just a factor of, not just a product of your, the fact that your children are some are going to public schools, the others are going to, that happens in every country. I mean, there are various, different streams of education in the most, the equal societies. They're private school, they have private schools, they have their public schools, they have their seminaries. So I mean, these kind of streams exist in every society. So that's where the issue was, that the simplistic causal relationship between let's merge all the schools, let's merge all the streams, let's teach all children one curriculum, and for them that meant not access to similar teachers, similar quality teachers, or not access to similar kinds of curricular and co-curricular activities, or similar kinds of, good schools or other things that should come with good schools, but just, the same kind of textbook. And for them, the causal relationship was as simple as that, which if you understand education, is not, is not true.
So, Ayesha, we've spoken a little bit about the history and what various governments have brought to the table, and all of them have had an eye out, perhaps, for, or at least an acknowledgement of a difference between what education offers to certain people in Pakistan, and acknowledgement of how it needs to be corrected. Aapne ye bhi kaha ke they do away with the previous policies of the past. And that's fine. I suppose in every couple of years you have the opportunity to reset the agenda in education. It doesn't happen the right way, and often education is a battleground. It has been a battleground in the last 1.5 years, particularly where various people have, experts like yourself, have come to mainstream channels and said this is not going right. What hasn't gone right?
There's nothing wrong with a political party coming in and making certain claims and doing certain things and saying that we are the first ones to do it. As long as you do them correctly or you do them for the right reasons, right? I mean, one reason being that you're a politician and you want to win over your, people who are going to vote for you in the next election. But the other right reason is also, I mean, there can be more than one right reason, is that this is the education of your children. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that that's okay, right? The issue is when that is all that you do. When you do not, and that's where you stop, right? And that's what at least my issue as a critic has been. As people who are in the field of education already know, this is not the first time that the national education, the minimum learning standards have been introduced. Yeah. We have had a document like this since 2006. There have been some updates to it over the years, at least a couple that I know of over the years. And it's a living document. Your national curriculum framework is always a living document that needs to be updated after every few years, depending on the advancements that are made in different knowledge areas. So that is fine. And this is something that's a very technical exercise. It's not a political exercise. Yeah. All kinds of education systems around the world do it and should keep doing it. I think the issue started when this became really, we are the first ones who are doing it. This has never been done before. And if we do this, then, certain things will happen.
But isn't that the PTI's constant spiel that we are the cool kid on the block? We are the first one to take
it was for the first year, right? But then there was a lot of criticism made and a lot of people came out, like myself, who wrote about it, talked about it, and said that no, this is not the first time. This is not even a curriculum. A curriculum is much bigger than your minimum learning standards. This is what it is. It is just the minimum that a child should be able to do or know at the end of a grade level in a certain subject area. And this has always been there since 2006, and that is where over time the government actually basically acknowledged that and started calling it just your minimum learning standards that anyone can add to, and you can take it to wherever you want to take it. But this is the minimum that should be consistent across your provinces and across your school systems. So that's that's that story. So last year there was a a very big debate. There was a lot of criticism when the primary school, so they're doing this in phases, right? Yeah. Phase 1 is which last year they worked on the primary school curriculum for grades 1 to 5. The minimum learning standards document came out. There was a lot of criticism. My biggest criticism was that, and so was of a lot of other people that I know of, was that it's not much different from the 2006 curriculum. Right? It's more or less the same. I actually did, there's a software that checks for similarity, between documents. And I use that software. HEC, gives it for academic purposes. I use that software to run a similarity check. And for most of your subjects, the similarity was really, really high. So 80%, 90% in early childhood education, where a lot of research has happened recently over the last 15 years. Since 2006. I think the similarity index was 95%. The only subject where we saw a lot of difference is your Islamiyat. So Islamiyat was really bloated. In earlier years, the policy earlier was that your children are going to go through your the first 30 separas of Quran in the first 8 years, class 1 se lekar class 8. But this time around, they squeezed it into the first 5 years. So they said, by the time you graduate from grade 5, you should have been through.
Why though? What is the reasoning behind it? What is the impulse in your view behind creating this kind of load? It is a subject at the end of the day, and it is an academic year that carries the burden of the syllabus. What do you think the impulse is beyond so much added tutelage?
I think, and I made this point last year as well in one of my articles. I think in their the all the governments, even before the PTI government, have been very interested in mainstreaming your madrasas, right? They have been trying very hard to. There have been several strategies that have been made over the years to register your madrasas and to bring in, to bring about reform in their system of education. And I think in that vein, they reach. I mean, of course, I wasn't a part of, and those conversations are not public, right? So I'm not able to say with 100% surety. But this is my analysis. This is my assessment based on what I've heard, what I've read, and how this has the whole SNC exercise, what it has resulted in. My understanding is that in that vein, in that effort to mainstream the madrasas, they negotiated. And the negotiation was that we'll adopt, we'll bloat our Islamiyat subject, we'll probably also plug in Islamic content. It has always been there across, our curriculum in all of the textbooks, but we'll do more of that across subjects. And if we do that, can you please also adopt our curriculum? Right? Can we register you, and can we bring you into the, can you also start offering the regular subjects to your children? I think this is what happened. The government, of course, does not agree with it. A lot of other experts in education may not agree with it, but this is my assessment. And I think over time, if you go back, I mean, these TV recordings or interview recordings are available publicly. If you do a little bit of research, you'll actually come across video clips where madrasas came on TV and said, well, the government is saying that we are on board and that we are adopting SNC, but we are not. I mean, we were only consulted for your Islamic subject. The government only consulted us to basically develop their subject of Islamiyat. But if they want us to adopt their SNC or adopt their subjects, they'll have to adopt parts of our curriculum. So the madrasas has been over time, has been very, very clear about what it is that they want, and they have been in a very negotiating mood. They have not been. It's just the government that has always claimed that we have the madrasas on board and that they're going to adopt it.
So if Islamiyat becomes like the bloated category in subjects that kids from a very young age have to learn, there's always been an Islamiyat syllabus, and it may go up, it may go down, but does this added content really lead to any real outcomes? I'm not sure. I'm struggling with the idea of why we're adding so much Islamiyat content. I don't see this as an academic exercise alone, because there is a political orientation that comes with the syllabus, every syllabus, right? The degree of information or insight you have into a certain academic debate that stays with you and that leads to your political orientation as a voter, as a citizen, as so many things in public life. Does greater Islamiyat content lead to a more religious society, a religiously more aligned or corrected society? And perhaps we can later on talk about the role of minorities as well, how they fit into the mix. But tell me what your reading of this is first.
I don't consider myself an expert of, or maybe not even the right person to answer this question, to be very, very honest. I mean, I don't know what adding more, because if you ask me my personal opinion or my personal opinion as an education expert, I will go as far as saying that the any education system, be it your public education system or your private education, should not be responsible for teaching about religion or religion per se. I mean, I don't think it's the purview. I know the Constitution states, so there are two articles that people cite justifying the inclusion of Islamiyat or the inclusion of teaching of Quran as a subject.
Okay.
And the two constitutions that they regularly cite are, if I'm not forgetting, Article 227 And there's another article that is Article 31 of your Constitution of Pakistan 1973. And basically, I mean, I obviously do not have the exact language in front of me right now, but you can easily like Google it and you'll see it's the gist of the two articles is that the state is responsible for facilitating its citizens, especially the Muslim, the majority, which is the majority in your country, to facilitate them to align their lives according to the teachings of Quran and Sunnah.
Okay, that is a political exercise.
I mean, I don't know what I call it, but this is what it is, right? This is the gist of the two articles that I cited. In my mind, and they talk about then there is some, there's this bigger statement in the article, and then there are subparts to it. And one of the parts then in Article 31 talks about mandatory teaching of Islam and Quran. Now, it says mandatory teaching of Islam and Quran. I don't think that the only interpretation of it is teaching it through your public school system or your private school system. We have enough madrasas in this country. We have a mosque in almost every, neighborhood. You actually have more than one mosque, depending on how many sects or live in that neighborhood. I don't think there's a shortage of that kind of instruction if anybody wanted it. Growing up, I remember my family hired a Qari Sahib to come after school and teach us Quran. There are families who are not able to afford a private Qari, but they have access to a local madrasa or local mosque where a Qari is more than willing to teach their children. Or there are elders in your household that can easily teach you Quran.
Or televangelism is now the latest.
Or your YouTube or whatever. You have access. I don't think in Pakistan there's any shortage of facilities that are available outside your education system that can give you that kind of training. But that's my personal view. A lot of people, a lot of very progressive educationists may not agree with it, and that's fine. So I'm not going to contest right now in this particular conversation that the public school system or the private school system, for that matter, should not be responsible for or imparting Islamic education. It's fine as long as the majority wants it, and I know that a lot of parents, even I know, want their children to study Islam or Quran in the schools if that facility is available, as long as you keep it separate from your compulsory subjects that your minorities are also going to be studying. The issue right now and the debate right now, especially in the past 6 months, and it's for 2 or 3 different reasons that this debate is happening, is that your compulsory subjects, and by compulsory I mean your English, your Urdu, social studies, science, all the other subjects apart from Islamiyat, contain a lot of Islamic content. And by Islamic content, when you say that, a lot of people, how conversations normally happen in our society. Nobody will go and look at the curriculum. Nobody is going to go and look at the textbooks, but everyone is going to form an opinion and then also voice that opinion and then think that my opinion is the right opinion. So that's a major issue right now, because of which a lot of disinformation is you see a lot of wrong information out there. And so people who are really interested, it's very hard for them to make up their mind because they're unsure about whether they should listen to this point of view or that point of view, and they're not willing to do the research or look at the books or ask somebody who's an expert. So coming back to your question, the issue right now is that your compulsory subjects have a lot of Islamic content. It has always been there. I remember the minority activists were in court even in 2014 saying that your compulsory subjects infringe on minority rights. And there's an article in your Constitution 1973. It's called Article 22A. You must have heard and read about it a lot in the recent debates. And I have this written down in front of me. Just to give you verbatim, the statement in the Constitution, and basically it states there's no rocket science. It's very, very clear. It states no person attending any educational institution shall be required to receive religious instruction or take part in any religious ceremony or attend religious worship if such instruction, ceremony, or worship relates to a religion other than his own.
Yeah.
ठीक है? और फिर आपको ये भी पता है कि there is an Article 25A in your Constitution that basically states that all citizens are equal before the law and entitled to equal protection.
So let's thank you for quoting that. I think this points to a very significant part of our conversation, where the whole idea of inclusion then falls flat on its head. We do know that there are constitutional provisions, affirmative action. There is a spirit of the Constitution that hasn't been realized, and the Constitution was written in 1973. The drafters had a particular policy outlook, even a political outlook. Several years later, 50 years later, I'm not sure that we are making good on that spirit at all. And education really points to that impulse, where we are willing to engineer the Islamiyats or the entire syllabus. And Islamiyat, by the way, is not a problem, like you've said. This is an Islamic society that is willing to become more Islamic. For those seeking that trajectory, and political parties seem to be following that impulse. Of course, there's a flip side also, and we're not talking about extremism and radicalization, because that is the grunge and the nasty sort of elements of it that prop up, and we've dealt with them over the last 40 years. But there is also a very shrinking space for those who do not ascribe to this code. For minorities in particular, kids are in school, or minority communities are in office. You can't apply for certain offices. Of course, the Constitution also says you can't be head of state. Public offices become a problem, jobs become a problem, acquiring positions or even admissions becomes a problem, so on and so forth.
Graduation has become a problem in Punjab, like, what...
yes, of course.
Asking him, he said that basically you're not going to get a degree if you're unable to, I think, recite the Holy Quran.
Recite the Holy Quran. So, there is a cascade of issues which perhaps we cannot fit into this discussion. But education, coming back to the article that you cited, where does that leave kids from minority backgrounds? And I've heard that, the decision makers have said, if this does not suit them, they're willing to leave the class during periods when Islamiyat is being taught, etc. What kind of attitude is that to program, or even, shall we even expect that this impulse or this respect for this article is with those people?
And even before I get to the direct answer to your question, let me just very briefly, there a lot of people and a lot of these activists who are for this cause have actually done an analysis, because the court there's a court in the Supreme Court right now. It's been there for several, I think, for at least for a couple of years now. In the Supreme Court, where the minority activists, there are a number of issues pertaining to the minorities, including the inclusion of Islamic content in compulsory subjects. They have been court a very long time, and they have done very extensive analysis of your compulsory subjects, which shows that your compulsory subjects, including the subject of maths. Maths, just imagine, how do you even fit Islamic content or any religious content for that matter in math? But I'll just give you because it may be amusing for people who are listening. So this is how you include it. I looked at grade 5 math, I was looking the other day, and there was an exercise that teaches you, so there's a competency in grade 5 math that's called data handling. What that basically means is that you should be able to make charts and interpret charts, etc., your graphs and bar graphs and things like that. And so the question that there's an exercise at the end of the chapter that asks the students to basically look at the bar chart and interpret it. And the question that is posed is, in a certain mohalla, people go to the local mosque to say their Zohar prayer, this many times in a month, You look at the chart and you interpret it.
I see.
And then for some reason in maths they found that it will be useful somehow academically for children to be able to memorize the Islamic months of the calendar. So ये तो बड़ी innocent, these are very innocent examples, and anybody who's not really familiar with how this can be problematic can just say, oh, so फिर क्या हुआ? And that's fine. Okay, fine. I'm willing to basically play along and say, okay, but
it's helpful that you mentioned them anyway.
But this is the minimum. This is the minimum. Yeah. This is the most innocent. Okay? And so in math and science, you see that there's maybe 8% of religious or Islamic content, and then it grows, further. And when you start talking about subjects such as Urdu, which is for some reason we consider it to be a Muslim subject, right? I don't know why, but for some reason, maybe because of the whole history of Urdu language, but somehow it's considered to be it's okay to have a lot of Islamic content because ye to Muslimanon ki zuban hai, something like that. So if you look at Islamiyat, there's according to my assessment, according to the particular analysis that I just referred to, according to them, there's 50% Islamic content. I mean, out of your entire Urdu, 50% of it is you're teaching Urdu through Islamic content. My own analysis is that if you look at, because I've looked at all Urdu books from grade 1 to grade 5, I think it's anywhere from 25% to 75%, depending on which grade level you're looking at. And it's really, really problematic because it's not just an inclusion of, of a hamd or a naat as a literary, piece of work. It's basically establishing and then asking children to basically say yes to questions like, for example, that the Holy Prophet is the last prophet of God, that there's only one Allah, not God. Allah who's the creator of the universe. So basically, that's your kalma, basically, your first kalma. So you basically, 50% of your Urdu content is doing that. And when the Supreme Court, Justice Gulzar, I think, is the one who reportedly, when this petition was filed, called in the Secretary of Education, the Federal Secretary of Education, and asked them to explain. And this happened this year. And she basically came in and said that we have included a footnote at the end of such content in your textbooks that basically suggests to the teacher to not force minority children to sit through these lessons and that they should be sent out of the classroom if they're not comfortable with it. I mean, I feel very awkward having to explain why that is an issue, right? Educationally, because if 50% or 70% of the time they're going to be, outside the classroom, we already know that children are not learning even when they're going to school. They are barely performing in any test that you look at, local or international. 40% literacy in Urdu, 40% they're performing in your math or 15% in English. So if 70% of the class time they're not going to be in the classroom, educationally, but then just imagine having to identify yourself as somebody who doesn't belong.
Yeah, being called out and being said, please leave the class because this is.
And a lot of children are not going to leave. I mean, okay, so when I say this becomes anecdotal. This doesn't really count as, evidence, as in, how researchers want to look at, what they call evidence. But anecdotally, because I've worked in education for so long, I know that even in places like Islamabad, Lahore, Karachi, nowhere in Pakistan is more progressive than, generally speaking, than these cities. I've been to schools where children from minority faiths, sometimes you just sit through those classes because, where else would they go, right? Or their parents come in and they say, just let them attend the class, even your Islamic class, because I don't want them to be sitting outside for 40 minutes or 50 minutes. They learn something. And in certain instances, teachers forcefully make them sit through those classes. So there are also instances. You have 20 lakh teachers, 2 million teachers in your country. You know the quality of your teachers, not just in terms of their preparation for teaching, but the kinds of human beings. They're a representation of your society. Right? They're people like us. So their ethical standards and their behaviors, their attitudes towards minorities are the other attitudes that you see, around us every day. Why do you expect them to be different?
So this is interesting. Have you spoken to teachers? What is their view? Because they're the implementers of this grand design. Do they feel comfortable with this sort of thing? What is their strategy?
I don't think teachers even, a lot of teachers even know or care about this. I think this is a conversation that's happening at this level. This conversation never happens at this level. Look at your policies, where are they made? Look at your SNC, where is it made? It's made at your ethics body where, they have certain representatives from here and there, but those are never your, the implementers at this level. You go and talk to teachers, I think the most likely answer that you're going to come across is that, to kya hua, ye achhi baat hai. Last year, if you hear some of these debates, your federal minister was actually referring to this Mr. Peter Jacobs, who is the executive director of the Center for Social, Justice in Lahore.
Renowned human rights defender.
Yes, and he's been very in the fore of this entire, also a part of the petition that's in the Supreme Court right now. And so last year, your ministry was saying that we have consulted these activists, they are on board, they're saying this curriculum is very, very inclusive. So if you look at the minimum learning standards, of course, when you look at the Urdu minimum learning standards, for instance, that's not going to say that we are teaching children to, we are teaching children Islam. Of course, that's going to say that we're teaching children to do their alif bebe, or to be able to write or to be able to read. It's the content in the textbook that's an issue through which you teach children these skills, right? So your standards are different, your curriculum document is different, and your textbook is a different story. So when the textbooks came out this year, the same people, the same minority experts were basically, what happened? You told us the books are going to be different this time around. We have been in court since 2014. This is precisely what we have been petitioning against. And this, it's not even the same as before. It's actually worse than before. It's much more beefed up, even in your compulsory subjects. There are several other things. There are actually several other acts of parliaments because of which your Islamic content actually in your compulsory subjects looks a little different.
So Ayesha, thanks for detailing all of that. There's so much agitation is happening on the part of minority members, minority communities, etc. Have those recommendations not fully been taken on board? And of course they haven't, but haven't they been even considered? And if I'm not sure if the curriculum, the writing of the textbooks, etc., is that if it's a fait accompli yet or not. But can this be righted at present, if not in, for the primary level, the secondary level perhaps?
So you assume that because we have had these government departments for so long and we've been doing this exercise for so long, this must be the case, but that is not. And I think it's partially because we are just incompetent, and the second reason is that we have very, very weak institutions because of that incompetence and because of no accountability, because nobody really cares about education. And then the third thing is that this whole exercise of the SNC was not started for the right reasons. The reason was very, very political. The reason was that we have been making this promise since 2013. We have made this again after coming in the federal government in 2018. Let's just do it and be done with it. Changing the quality of your education system, or even if the correlation or the causation is flawed between your merging your education streams and ending the class divide, even if that's a flawed connection, it still cannot happen in 5 years, right? But you know how political governments think. They think only about their tenure, about their 5 years. What it is that they, the 3-4 big things from their manifestos or from their campaign trails that they should be able to, at the end of 5 years, tell people that they have accomplished and, have changed or will very soon change people's lives. This was actually one of those things. I see it as one of those things very, very clearly because I've been following this conversation for 2 years now. Actually longer than that. So to me, this was done as an exercise with that objective in mind. that will just check that box. And nobody will notice because, education, come on, who talks about education? And we'll just say that we have done the SNC and now everyone is teaching the same book and now the education or the class divide has ended. Because if it wasn't that, if it weren't the case, if they were doing it for the right reasons, I think what they would have done is that when they started, they would have done a better job of doing what they have done so far. So by that I mean when they started, for example, writing the books, they would have, if you look at the books right now, so the very first page of every textbook lists the name of the authors of that book. It also lists the name of people who then reviewed the work of those authors. And overall, if you look at one textbook, there are around 20 people, between the two, between the writer and the reviewers of the books. And then eventually it's the NCC bureaucrats who then, sign off and say that this is good to go to print. And if you look at those names, for every book, for every subject, for every grade level, it's just Muslim names. Very, very clearly, Muslim names. There's not a single name that is a typical minority name. That's the.
Why is that a problem?
Because all of us, you and I, we belong to the same viewpoint, same religious, we belong to the same faith. It's like. Why do I have to explain it?
The reason I ask you this is because people listening in. I think it's important.
Because if it's the same people. That's why we talk about diversity on teams, right? We say, why are diverse teams good? And diversity means several things, right? It may be diversity in terms of equal representation of men and women, equal representation of people from different ethnicities, or representation of people from different religious faiths, or representation of people from different age groups. Diversity can be defined in these different ways, right? So, if people who are writing a book for a certain subject are the same type of people, have absolutely no difference. Even with the best of intentions, they are going to make mistakes like these. They're not going to be able to see that they are heavily, it's a heavily biased team that's working on it. So that's the bias, right? The religious bias, that unknowingly you write content or you choose content from sources that's just Islamic content. The only representation of other religions that you see in one textbook, or one odd example would be maybe a picture of like a Christmas tree, or a small cartoon that basically shows Holi, where children are running around and throwing color on each other. So that is what the government says inclusion is.
The tokenism is quite obvious.
Tokenism, thank you for the word. I was actually struggling to remember that word. But
so the inclusion of images like Christmas trees or holies, that just amounts to tokenism.
That amounts to tokenism, which very interestingly, and to a lot of people this doesn't make sense, but if you understand how embedded curriculum or indirect messaging or indirect, how children learn indirectly through these things, then you understand better, why this is a problem. So I did a very simple exercise of counting the names of, the various characters in your book. So I did this for Urdu and English because that's where you have the most stories and poems and things like that. So there were hundreds of names across books in the subject of English and subject of Urdu. Some 250 names in both subjects. And out of them, I think, if not more, at least 98-99% are Muslim names. There's an odd John or odd Jane that's included in one book in one grade level in one subject, but it's basically referring to the same tokenism that you just referred to, right? So for the review, for the authors, for the developers, or for the the architects of the SNC, that inclusion is enough and should make people happy. But I mean, to me, that's actually a secondary issue. I have an issue when people start conflating that by that token inclusion of minorities with the issue of infringement of minority rights by including Islamic content into compulsory subject. These are two different things,
Absolutely.
right? So it should not be conflated. And a lot of times when you look at how the government responds to this criticism, that's what they do. And to me, that's either a sign of they themselves do not understand what the difference is or what the problem is, or it's just a diversionary or deflection tactic, which basically deflects attention from where the issue is. So I think the the easiest way of fixing this issue, or to never have this issue, would have been to be more inclusive in your when you put together your team of authors and your team of reviewers. When you were still sitting behind closed doors, when this was not a conversation that was happening out in the open, because when that happens it becomes a political issue more than an educational exercise. So that would have been the best place, behind closed doors, when they were giving instructions to the authors. If you go to the website of the Ministry of Education, they talk about, there's a whole list of things that they say drove this entire exercise of the SNC. And the very first thing is Quran and Sunnah, of course, that everything has to be aligned with that. And then there are certain good things. There are certain things that just don't make sense. But one of the things that they claim that they have done when they developed this SNC is that they kept in the fore your constitutional frameworks.
Yeah.
Had they done that, I mean, they could not have
arrived at such a formula.
Because constitutional frameworks can. So your constitutional frameworks would have been your 227 and your 31, but also your 22A, right? So I mean, they say things, but that's different from how they did things. So that would have been the best policy or the best approach. That sadly did not happen. There was a lot of criticism that was raised during that time. The government decided that the best approach will be to just deflect and divert and never admit there's a problem. For the people, I mean, when it comes to people or the lay person who's not an education expert, or even some of us who are education experts but don't really understand this particular problem, whenever you're having an issue between two sides of an argument, and both sides seem to make sense or at least have some authority. In this case, it's the critics, the education experts, the minority activists, and the other side is your SNC architects and the government, etc. And you're having trouble understanding who's right, because they both seem to be experts, right, in their own right. I think the best way of making a judgment about who may be more right is the side that's more thoughtful, or the side that's more open-minded, or the side that is at least willing to accept that this was a big exercise. And yes, there could have been mistakes. I mean, there must have been mistakes. There are mistakes. We understand there have been weaknesses. There are certain things that we can resolve because they're more technical in nature. There are other things that we won't be able to resolve because these are either acts of parliament. There are several acts that have actually, because of which you see books like you see them. And then there are certain political, issues that will just become, very difficult for anyone to handle. So going forward, I think what is done. August is upon us. The new academic session, we know that because of COVID, schools have been already been closed for so long. Educationists, to be very honest, at this point, are maybe a little less worried about the SNC. They are more worried about all the educational losses that the children are going to come back with.
Yeah.
And so how to remediate those. So I don't think this is the right time for now go back and do this exercise. Of course, nobody's going to do that. But going forward, I think you still have another 2 years. They still have to work on their middle school curriculum, their high school and their higher secondary curriculum. I think this should be taken, unfortunately, and it shouldn't have been this way, but should be taken as an opportunity to basically reflect on what they've done so far, take into account all reasonable feedback. I'm sure not all of it can be addressed because of various reasons, but there's a lot that can be addressed. But they need to show that openness, they need to show that seriousness. and take it and work on the next phase of their SNC for the middle and the rest of it. To me, that's the only way of going forward.
I suppose there is that doesn't sound like a happy ending to most of us, those who have been watching this space, and of course this is caveated with the lament that inclusion does remain a very, very contested and perhaps even a pipe dream for Pakistan's decision makers as well as communities, particularly Pakistan's minority communities who have been shortchanged in several policy procedures.
But also, let's just decide that. I mean, to me, inclusion is for somebody who's not already a part of something, right? I mean, minorities are, your constitution says that they are equal, everyone is equal before the law, no matter who they are. Who are we to include them? I mean, I'm sorry, I know you said it, I know the way you have used the word, but that's, to me, even that is problematic because
Correct,
I think
yes.
we are no one to include them.
And I think I'm glad you raised this point. The deal is that reversing exclusion does not turn into inclusion. That's how I see it. And no matter of, you can keep acknowledging that these are cohorts that are disadvantaged by just bringing them onto the table, by giving them tokenism, by including a name among 98 names, just 2 of them, a John or a Jane, does not really mean that the qualitative life worth or consequence of those children or those adults will increase. So that's where we are at. I'd like to thank Dr. Ayesha Razzaque for giving us her time and for several such conversations to happen with her, because this is a story that does unfold over the next couple of months. Thank you, Ayesha, very much for joining us.
Thank you so much. Thank you.